Thank you for coming. My name is Melissa. I am a Director of Community Engagement at the Neighborhood Developers. I'm happy to welcome you to our first fall Shirley Ave Planning Meeting. We've been very busy over the summer and we're excited to be back with you tonight. So I'm going to introduce one of our T&D board members and resident leaders, Tech Lang, who's going to do the welcome on behalf of the board.
So good evening, everyone. Like Melissa said, my name is Tech Lang. I'm one of actually three T&D board members from Revere in the room right now. I don't know for those of you that, I don't know where Orlando went. Oh, so Orlando back there, he's also a board member, as well as Dimple Rana, who's sitting right back there. She's raising her hand. We've been sort of very excited for this process to start back up again. There's a lot of work that's been going on over the course of the summer. For those of you that have been involved in the process, thank you, and thank you for returning. For those of you who are actually at this meeting for the first time, we're very excited to see you here. We have a great combination of folks. I think we have everyone from city representatives to other folks in City Hall and the planning department, residents as well. Everyone is equally important. So we're really excited to actually really take a look at a presentation on some of the data and information that was collected from all the surveying that was done in the community in the spring as well as throughout the summer. And I think the purpose of this meeting this evening is to actually start really digging into action plans. So that was the point of this whole process, to actually look at the community, look at how we would like to improve, better, and strengthen it. And this is our opportunity to actually start committing ourselves as residents, as city officials, as T&D, to really pushing forward that plan into action. So again, I'm excited to have everyone here. I think this is going to be the first of a number of meetings for all of us. But I don't want to talk too much. I'm actually going to hand it over back to Melissa. But thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Tech. All right, can you advance us? Thank you. So, what are we going to do tonight? Tonight, we have welcomed you. Welcome. We're going to move into a quick project update, so letting you know what we've been working on over the summer. Then what we've called setting the context for action, we're going to share information. Our 4 focus areas are housing, economic development, infrastructure, and quality of life. So we've been busy doing a lot of research over the summer, and we're going to share what we found. We're going to do a summary as a big group, and then you'll see we're going to move into task force discussions, and we're going to have deeper discussions in each of the 4 areas. So some of you have already expressed your interest in task forces and signed up for task forces, and if you haven't, then you'll be able to choose which area you are most interested and passionate about, and which area you want to work on action steps in. So tonight's meeting is all about getting to actions that will improve the community. At the end, we're going to come back together, we're going to do some next steps, and we'll talk about the next meeting date, and then we will be on our way. Any questions about the plans for tonight? Great. So together what we're going to do is we're going to identify community priorities for action for housing, infrastructure, quality of life, and economic issues. As we go through this information, we will have some questions that we want to investigate further, and that's what the task forces will work on, and some things that we will figure out right away what we want our action steps to be. So, project timeline, what we have accomplished. In the spring, I think many of you were at the community kickoff where we talked about strengths and challenges of the neighborhood, and then we had 2 what we called community charrettes where we went deeper into the 4 focus areas to get some more community feedback. Over the summer, we did a lot of work on Down here, we did shopper surveys, we did business surveys, we did some mapping, we did research, and we're gonna share all that with you tonight. And we also had a steering committee meeting. We have a steering committee of residents and stakeholders for this process. Some of you are on that committee to make sure that it is the best process and make sure that we're asking the right questions and we're looking at the right information so that at the end we get to an action plan that really works for the neighborhood. Moving forward, here we are tonight at this community forum. We will do another community forum on December 10th. We'll come back together as a whole again. And that community forum, what we're going to do is talk about priority actions and work on getting commitments for those actions. Then we'll take a break for the holidays and the new year. We'll come back together in January, and then in February we'll finish the plan. And as you guys might remember, nothing is going to go on the plan unless there are organizations or residents or different entities that are willing to work on it and make it happen. So this is our study area. This is the Shirley Avenue neighborhood. And as you'll see in the data that we're presenting and the conversations in the focus group, we're focusing right here. So you can see Shirley here, the T-stop, the beach. So the first thing we wanted to highlight and to share with everybody was that as we were going through the community input and as we were collecting other information about the neighborhood and other studies that have happened, we were seeing some themes that cut across all 4 focus areas. The first one of these themes was language barriers. This is a very diverse neighborhood. There are lots of languages spoken, and in each of the 4 areas, language barriers came up. So as we go into those task force conversations, we want to be mindful of the multilingual nature of the community and that whatever actions we take that into consideration and address that. So this is true between customers and shop owners in the business conversation. It's true between tenants and landlords. We heard about language barriers there. Between individuals in the community and those in positions of authority, neighborhood signs, and information and resources being in multiple languages. So as we talk about this, these are some of the languages that are spoken. So 27% English only, 41% speak Spanish, 15% other Indo-European languages. Indo-European languages are
like French and actually I think it's a whole swath Italian, maybe even German.
All the way from European languages as well as Farsi. Those are also European.
Yeah, it's a
All the
broad
way down
swath.
to northern India.
Thank you.
And then 14% Asian and Pacific Islander languages and 2% other. So there's a real range, and you can see it as you look at the chart. So we really need to be mindful of that. When we look at diversity in the Shirley Ave neighborhood, 41% Hispanic, 33% white, 18% Asian. Those are our 3 biggest populations. Then we have 6% Black or African American, 1% 2 or more race. This is a very diverse neighborhood. And when we talked in the spring, that was one of the strengths that everybody felt about the neighborhood. Everybody talked about the diversity and how they wanted to celebrate it and honor it, which is fantastic. Access to information was another theme we found in all 4 areas. So making sure that residents and businesses are aware of existing programs and thinking about how we can make sure that residents and businesses can take advantage of those programs, know where to go to get the information, can access it and act upon it. Agency and nonprofit communication of information. There are lots of agencies doing really great work in the neighborhood. Is it being communicated, and is it being communicated multilingually, right? It's a question we need to think about. And methods to share information between people groups and agencies. So thinking beyond just the flyers or the emails, how do we get the information out into the community? And then I think the last one is lack of resources and unpredictable futures. So we've heard that there are underfunded programs at federal, state, and local levels. There are ongoing MBTA funding issues, healthcare transformations, as I'm sure many of you have heard in the news, multiple nonprofit organizations and missions, and private market uncertainty. So there are lots of things happening, and there's a need to bring more resources to the community. So as you have your conversations, let's make sure that we're talking about that as well. Oh, there's one more. And future changes. So we've got some big things that could be happening in the future. So we have the proposed casino. We have the potential development of the Wonderland dog track down the line. We have the waterfront square down the line, and Wonderland Marketplace. These are all big development areas that are potential sites for future development. And these are all areas that could have an impact on the neighborhood. So as we're thinking about the different areas, we need to keep this context in mind, because these forces, our neighborhood is right in the middle of all of this development. So we want to be mindful of that, especially as we're talking about housing opportunities, economic development, business development. We want to make sure that we're looking ahead to the future and we're prepared for any potential changes. So our task force topics: housing, infrastructure, quality of life, and economic issues, which include business district and job development and readiness. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathryn Maddon, who is our senior level planner on this project, and she's going to walk us through some of what we heard.
Great.
Thank you.
Melissa. So I'm very happy to join everybody. Can I lift this up or no? Just leave it. I'm coming in. I missed the spring meetings, but I've been doing a lot of reading and talking with everyone who's been involved. So I'm very glad to be part of this, and I want to just talk a little bit about the quality of life and give you a sense of what the task force is going to talk in great detail, but we're just going to give you an overview of what some of those issues were that came up and some of the data that we're looking at. So one of the big topics was this notion of that people need to be more connected, that when people know each other, and that there's a better sense of community, a better sense of community pride. So in the task force on the quality of life, Melissa and her group will look at this data in more detail in terms of how perceptions of the neighborhood change once people are more involved. The other thing they'll be looking at is programs, because, you know, the question, especially when you're thinking about youth and elderly, but really everybody, is like, what are the things to do? How can people be involved? How do we meet up with each other and form community through those activities? And so Rachel, Melissa, they've been looking at all the different programs that exist, and so we want to make everyone aware of that. Youth issues, of course, always come up, and I think, there's actually quite a lot of information that they'll be talking in detail about a youth survey, looking at how and where to engage youth, right? That's something that all the towns are very focused on, and Revere as well, in terms of what uses and what places are best for youth to go. We also want to make sure that it's a safe neighborhood. So we have some data on crime, and of course we have our community police here. But we always want to be thinking about, if we want people to be out and about, that we want to make sure the neighborhood's very safe. All of this takes ongoing work. So safety, one of the things we heard about in the spring was people marked up maps, and so we've captured some of that, and they'll look in more detail in terms of how there's data on where crime is, but there's also perceptions of where places are safe or not safe. Other data that we've been looking at is health and building code information, and wanting to dive in. In many cases, we have data, maybe it doesn't match up with what people's perceptions are, and then we want to focus in and say, well, are the perceptions wrong, or maybe a lot of times the data's wrong? So it's an opportunity to look into seeing if we can get better data to make sure it matches what people are seeing on the ground. Cleanliness, that's in terms of a lot of issues, in terms of just the quality of life, in terms of, and these are things that that can be tackled. So people in the last meetings mapped out where some of these issues were. And I'm going to turn it to Amanda to talk about economics and housing, and then I'll wrap up with infrastructure.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Amanda Chism. I work at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, so some of you have probably seen me at meetings here in the past. I'm just going to go through the economic and housing issues. Well, there'll be 2 task forces on those tonight. In terms of facilitation, I'm actually going to be helping to facilitate the economic development group. And I think Rachel as well, if you want to raise your hand, and Orlando, I believe. If there's other people that are really interested in this, we'll definitely be diving into some of the data in a lot of detail, but like Kathryn said, I'm going to give you some sort of high-level information here. So the first thing that we wanted to understand was what are some of the larger forces that are at play, especially in the city of Revere. So this basically shows you what the employment has looked like since 2001. So from 2001 to 2007 or so, it was pretty much on the up, and peaked in 2007, and since then has been declining. In terms of projections for the future, they are a little brighter, so that's good news. There is a projection that the jobs will trend upward. But there are particular industries that have been growing despite this decline. Some of the major industries in the North Workforce Investment Area, which is where Revere is located, include professional and technical services, educational services, and health and social assistance. So health and social assistance in particular is a field that's been growing in Revere, and there's definitely going to be some opportunities for jobs there. So it's something to keep in mind as we discuss issues in the task force. This is a little bit more background in terms of employment. So this shows you the labor force in Revere. It's important to keep in mind that the labor force includes not only people who are working in Revere, but also people who are seeking employment. So that's why the numbers are a little high. You can see that it's been steadily growing since 2001. And Shirley, this is in Revere overall. In Shirley Avenue, there are about 3,000 people over 16 who are actively in the labor force. The unemployment rate down here is also, it's been descending since 2010, so that's good. It's at about 8%. The state level is around 7.2, so it's not too much higher than the state, but still is pretty high. And 2 things to kind of keep in mind in terms of this are that educational attainment, particularly in the neighborhood, is a challenge in terms of jobs, as well as workforce development trainings and job training availability. As you can see, about 68% of residents have only a high school degree or less. However, some of the more popular jobs in the neighborhood, like service occupations, production, transportation, material moving, those are actually well matched with some of the developments that might be coming in, like Wonderland, for example, or Waterfront Square. They might be offering retail or office jobs, and also hospitality jobs with the potential of Suffolk Downs. So that's just something to keep in mind, that those will be really accessible to Shirley Avenue residents. So this is just some of the existing employment training programs. There are some that are out there, but we've heard and we know that none of these are actually located in Revere, so that's a major challenge in terms of people accessing these. And the city hasn't really been able to have a lot of push in terms of where these are located. So it's been a challenge that the city's actively working on, and is cited in their CDBG reports. But just to kind of go through these, the first 3 are career centers. They're all accessible for people to drop in if you want job training services, resume services. Revere Cares actually offers a program for students, so if they're interested in being oriented towards certain types of work, they can do an internship program, and they're supported throughout that internship to make sure they're getting the most out of it. The community colleges all offer different training programs, certain certificate programs geared towards job training and workforce development. And then Women Encouraging Empowerment, which I think we have a couple people here from. They're focused on empowering women immigrants, but they also provide a lot of job training services. And then these are just a few small business training programs that are located mostly in the Boston area, so they're accessible to Revere residents, but again, they're not right here and they're not the easiest to get to. So in the summer of this year, TND did a couple of surveys, a shopper survey, which I'm going to cover here, and the business survey. So there were a total of 147 surveys that were collected in July 2013, and surveyors actually stood out on Shirley Avenue and just offered them to people going by to ask them about their shopping trends and desires. So here we see retail suggestions. So this is what people said in terms of the kind of retail that they would like to see in Shirley Avenue. So you can see that actually the most popular one is restaurants, followed closely by grocery stores and convenience stores. And one thing that's really interesting to take from this is that there are actually a significant amount of convenience stores, a couple of grocery stores in Shirley Avenue. So it's interesting to think about, well, maybe why are people not going to these stores? Which leads me to my next slide, which is why they are not shopping on Shirley Ave. So the most popular response here was actually about the quality of goods. So one thing to think about, especially in the economic task force, is, how do we better match the services and the retail, and how do we capture the residents that are in the neighborhood so that they are frequenting and supporting those stores? It's kind of a mismatch that we can dive into a little deeper. So this is the business survey. So the business survey was administered to businesses in the Shirley Avenue neighborhood. There were 30 businesses that were surveyed through phone calls and in-person interviews. And some of the key findings are just highlighted up here. You can see that most of them are small businesses. The majority have 1 or 2 employees, so they're not huge businesses in the neighborhood. In terms of the age of the business, actually a lot of them have been here for a while. The majority of them have been here for 4 years or more. And in terms of the health of businesses, compared to 6 months ago, most of the businesses are actually saying that they're doing about the same. So they haven't been doing much worse, they haven't been doing much better. And one thing to really keep in mind is that the majority of businesses are renting, so that's something to think through. Maybe there's a way to provide ownership opportunities and get people to actually own their property and improve relations there. This is a map of the property values in the neighborhood. So what we did is we actually took the total assessed value of the properties and looked at that versus the land value, just to see how much are these parcels worth and are there any parcels that are really underutilized. And what's really interesting about this is the darker green is actually the higher value, and you can see there's actually a lot of that. So the value is trending towards high even along the Shirley Avenue itself. And it's likely because this is a high density area because of where it is located, but this does have implications for landlords, and if you're trying to switch up ownership, et cetera, definitely something to keep in mind in terms of any real changes in terms of rental and owners. All right, so the housing task force. I think Emily and Jenny and Kristen will be facilitating this task force, so if you're in the housing task force, look for them afterwards. Just going to go through again some high-level highlights on the housing section. So this Kathryn showed earlier. This is that same concentration of code violations, which again is interesting that it's really on these 2 streets. So is it that it's underreported in other areas? Is it that maybe this really is a concern here? It's something to really consider, and maybe promoting the idea of people reporting more if there are violations going on is something to think about for housing in particular. In terms of that issue of condition and cleanliness, there are some programs, in particular the Home Improvement Loan Program that the city offers, where you can actually go to the city and on a first-term, first-served basis, they'll offer you a loan. So you can improve your property. It's really geared towards moderate and low-income persons and improving the condition of their property to eliminate those kind of code violations. These are projections. So this is similar to what we looked at for economic development, but this is actually projecting out to 2035. So there's a lot going on this left one. So I highlighted the columns on the right, which are in red, and that actually shows the population age that is growing most rapidly through 2035. And that's the 65 plus population. And you can see here for household projections that there's about 5,000 or so more households projected to come to Revere between now and 2035. So thinking about those together and thinking about targeting especially, affordable housing options and making sure that they're accessible to the populations that are growing. So affordability, one of the biggest measures of affordability is cost burden. So that means how much are you paying for your housing costs? So if you're paying more than 30% of your household income, then you would be considered cost burdened. So this is showing a pie chart of Revere overall. In Revere, about 29% of owners are cost burdened and 58% of renters. If you look at Shirley Avenue, in comparison to that, it's about 52% of owners and 54% of renters. So significantly more owners and about on par with renters. Of the population in Revere that's cost burdened, the pie chart breaks down what populations are most cost burdened. So you can see that really in blue here, elderly populations and small related 2 to 4 member households are the most cost burdened. So again, something to keep in mind in terms of development. And then there's just sort of the household median income here. You can see how it compares to Revere in general. It's lower, as well as the poverty rate being much higher. And then one thing to note is that 25% of households in Revere are actually severely cost burdened, which means that they're paying 50% or more of their income towards housing costs. So this shows home sales, which gives you an idea of sort of where the median price is in Revere for homes. It's around $250,000. So if we think through the housing, the median income in the neighborhood, that's not actually an affordable price to people at a median income in Revere. It would be more like $230,000. So that's kind of a large gap in terms of the average home sale. So that's, again, something really important to understand about Revere. And then an interesting comparison down here is the affordable housing and the amount that's in some of the comparable neighborhoods. Chelsea obviously has a lot above 15%. Everett is about the same as Revere, but places like Linfield and Peabody actually have more affordable housing. One of the challenges that Revere in particular faces is the fact that it is so dense and there aren't a lot of vacant parcels. So really trying to identify underutilized parcels, especially maybe commercial or industrial, is what the strategy needs to be in terms of bringing more residential in. This is a map of the zoning, everyone's favorite, most appealing topic. But just to give you some background, Shirley Ave is right here. So it's in the GB, or General Business District, and Beach Street is actually nestled within the General Business District as well. There's a proposal to potentially change that zoning for Beach Street because there's not a lot of actual businesses on Beach Street. So it may be rezoned residential, either similar to the residential that's south of Shirley Ave, which would be single family and 2-family dwellings, or potentially a denser residential area, which would allow for more apartment dwellings and 2- and 3-story buildings. This is a really interesting comparison. I'm going to talk about housing tenure by unit and then show you a map of housing tenure by property. So this is individual units. Shows you that in Revere about 590 units, or 29%, are renter occupied. And in Shirley Ave, there's actually 1,432 units, 71% renter occupied. So actually there's a ton more renters in Shirley Avenue overall if you compare that to Revere. There's a total of 2,022 occupied units in Shirley Avenue, and home ownership is something that should be considered in terms of maybe adding some more neighborhood stability and promoting family economic growth and well-being. So if there are programs that can help to do that or assist financially, that might be something to think about. But despite the fact that there are so many renters, there is actually a high level of owner-occupied properties. So that means that even if there are renters in certain buildings, the owner of that property is actually living in them. So that's good in terms of landlord-renter relations normally. If the person's living there and maintaining the property, they might be more motivated to take care of it. But it's just something to definitely think about because this is actually really high in terms of the level of owner properties. Property conditions, so this is a yellow map. That means that most of the properties are actually rated average by the assessor. That's where we pulled this information from. Shirley Avenue does have a slightly higher level of less than average ratings, but it's not particularly covered by poor or dilapidated. However, it is interesting to go through and pick out where those parcels are and think about maybe these are areas where we can target some of our improvements. And this is showing housing year built. So showing you that in general, the housing stock in Shirley Avenue is much older. 60% of all properties were built before 1950. And the darker the color, that means the older the building is. So in Shirley Avenue in particular, there is a lot of dark properties showing you that this really is an older housing stock in terms of improvements and rehabilitation. So the last issue that we heard a lot of at some of the community meetings was around public housing and how some of the properties aren't being maintained to the standard that people would like to see them being maintained. So I just want to give you a little bit of background on the Revere Housing Authority and the programs that they administer. These are just the 3 different housing assistance programs. They do Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, which actually goes to a participant who locates and leases their own housing in the private market. They also do the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program, which is similar to Section 8, but it's targeted to Massachusetts, and an Alternative Housing Voucher Program, which is a tenant-based program that's set up for alternative housing to homeless and other persons with special needs. So one thing to keep in mind is that the RHA, in addition to administering these housing assistance programs, they're trying to locate financing to rehab their properties, which can be a difficult process. I think that there's a couple of rehab programs or rehab projects that are actually in the pipeline now, so that's good. Good news for the neighborhood, but it would be interesting to have a conversation about, how can the RHA work with residents and how can residents work with the RHA to ensure that these problem properties are being addressed.
Actually, Amanda,
Yes.
people might have noticed the brown houses, the 2 brown triple deckers are now red, looking much better. They're in the middle of being renovated.
We see them.
And the old parsonage. So the Housing Authority has started to make good on their pledge to try and improve the property.
Excellent. So that's going to bring back Kathryn. She's going to talk about our 4th topic, which is infrastructure.
And I realized that I didn't introduce the quality of life facilitators, and I think it's Melissa, I think it's Dimple, the 2 of you? Okay, that's good. And the infrastructure, I'm going to help facilitate with Frank Stringy, so we're excited about that. So what did we hear about infrastructure? A big topic is open space. One thing to consider with open space is what Melissa just showed, is there's not a lot of vacant property, but I think in all the previous studies, and we'll revisit that because we don't want to redo it, there have been discussions about where open space could fit, whether it's playgrounds or basketball courts or community gardens. So we'll talk about sort of where that's possible and keep in mind, some of the recommendations that the city has in the works. The other thing that came up was also the conditions. So these were the comments from the last meeting. So we want to think about that. Lighting, crosswalks, blind driveways, sidewalk improvements, traffic calming, all of these things that we've looked at, but I think in this round, we really need to prioritize and find a way to find the resources to get some of this work done. The lighting, it's kind of fascinating. They're actually beautiful lights on Shirley Avenue, but they're only on half the street, and so half the street's quite well lit at night, and the other side is not. So we want to think about how to fix that problem. The other thing that we heard a lot about were difficulty in crossing and intersections, problem intersections. We actually mapped where the city has a list of problem intersections. So it'd be good for the group to look at that. Is this the right list? Did we forget any? Does this seem accurate? But you can see that Shirley Avenue is, of course, surrounded by busy roads that make it hard to cross, and Bell Circle especially, which is a really tricky, yes, a tricky location because the commuter rail's going right by there. So we will look at that one more time, and also thinking about bike bike trails and what's within easy walking distance, and some of the issues that the Walk to Safe Routes to School program that I know people are looking at. We want to take all of that into consideration in this area. We also looked at the traffic volumes, and which just, sort of highlights what the issue is, both for Shirley Avenue folks to get to the high school, to get to Broadway, but also for all of the rest of Revere to get across to the beach. So sort of bridging some of these major rivers will be a big topic. We also want to think about public transit and what the bus routes. It was interesting to notice that some of the bus routes in Revere are among the highest in the whole MBTA. The 116 and the 117 are the highest, the top 15 routes in the whole system. So we'll look at some of the survey findings that the MBTA did on those two routes and who uses them. And at that point, actually, I think that we could, at this point, we could just break up into the different locations, although I think, what's that?
Melissa?
I think, Melissa, you might have to help with the logistics here, because we're going to talk about, we're going to look at these issues, make sure it's the right issues, but then also really move back into the action steps that were presented, that you all raised in June, and move them forward. And where are we going?
So first, before we split up, are there any questions that folks have? We just presented a lot of data, a lot of information. We're going to go back over that information in small groups and look at it a little bit more closely, but I want to make sure there are no burning questions before we break up. No? No? All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to have two groups meet here in this room, and then two groups are going to go and meet in Ira's room. So if you are interested in housing, Emily and Jenny, raise your hand. We're going to have you guys stand up and go towards the back corner for now, just for shifting purposes. Okay, so housing's going to be in this back corner. If you are interested in economic development, Amanda is one of your facilitators, and you can go in this, and Rachel, you can go in this back corner over here, okay? If you are interested in working on quality of life action items, you're going to be with myself and Dimple. We're going to go over to Ira's office. And if you're interested in infrastructure, you're going to be with Kathryn or Frank, and you're also going to come over to Ira's room. Okay? So housing, economic development, and then quality of life and infrastructure are in Ira's room. Okay? So everybody pick a group. All right.
So it's already 10 minutes past the time that we were supposed to end. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying what the next steps are. Each of the groups are going to flesh out more the major questions that came up tonight, or continue to understand what the action steps are going to be. And then we're going to come back together. Do we have a date? Is it December 10th?
Right? December 10th.
Is that a Monday or a Tuesday? It's a Tuesday. Okay, so Tuesday, December 10th is when we will all come back together, reconvene the task forces to share what we've learned over the 8 weeks between now and then, and continue to refine those action steps. So there is one other meeting in between, at least one other meeting in between now and December 10th, which is October 21st, Monday, October 21st. We're going to be discussing the Celebrate Shirley Ave event that happened last Saturday. What was good about it, what was bad about it, how do we want to move forward with it in future years? And that's going to be at the fire station on Walden Street. So that's Monday, the 21st of October at 7 p.m. at 17 Walden Street. We'll be talking about Celebrate Shirley Ave. One final announcement, which is that Alicia, who owns a lovely fashion store on the corner of Shirley Ave and North Shore Road, is currently doing a raffle to benefit poor families in El Salvador. So if on your way out you're interested in participating in the raffle, this is the prize. It costs $5 to get a ticket. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming. We'll be in touch.